truth. We ain't gonna let nobody turn us around.
One of the reasons why Martin Luther King was so successful was he understood television. We deliberately had demonstrations before 12 o'clock in order to get the film to New York. They had to leave by 1.
We cannot, in all good conscience, obey such an injunction.
Dr. King and his staff were very, very savvy. They knew exactly what was going on.
You want me to just make a statement and not interview? You don't want to interview.
And they strategized how they could use their coverage to their advantage.
We must be willing to fill up the jails all over the state.
There's nobody that could make an hour-long speech any better than him. But for the 6 o'clock news, you had to get your message across. It had to be 30 seconds or less.
The time is always right to do right, and we cannot wait. We cannot continue to accept these conditions of oppression.
King would dramatize and force the media to deal with the issue. I've got to grab your attention without losing your interest and respect. And King mastered that.
But for all of King's sophistication, he could still be outmaneuvered by a clever adversary and risk losing control of the civil rights story.
I've often been told that I was welcome down here, but I didn't know whether I would be or not.
Laurie, L-A-U-R-I-E, Pritchett, is the police chief of Albany, Georgia. And he set about doing things differently.
King used the students' method of direct confrontation in Albany, Georgia. However, Police Chief Pritchett cleverly countered the nonviolent demonstrations with nonviolent arrests.
Dr. King thinks he's going to draw violence onto protesters, but the police chief down there was actually very savvy. He decided he was not going to play to the television cameras.
A ban on demonstrations has brought more than 1,500 arrests of desegregationists so far.
They prayed, they were asked to move on, they refused to do so. You're under arrest.
Pritchett jails Dr. King and a lot of other demonstrators. But his goal is not to let them have their way and stay in jail long enough to generate a lot of press and a lot of publicity.
This is one time that I'm out of jail, and I am not happy to be out.
Out of jail and out of the headlines, King seemed momentarily out of options. And the National Press Corps knew it.
Reporters present Albany as a big defeat. It's viewed as a serious political setback for Dr. King, and in part because there had been absolutely no white violence whatsoever against black demonstrators in Albany.
As long as civil rights activists were just being quietly and respectfully jailed, the media didn't really care about that story.
King knew he had to get the movement back on track. And to really make this notion of nonviolence work, he had to find a place where there would be resistance, where people could really see the ugliness of what they were confronting.
He recognized that nothing was going to change until and unless most Americans were exposed to the reality of what was going on. So that's what he needed to do, was provoke a reaction on the part of bigoted Southerners who are all too willing to play their part. He just had to bring them to the fore.
You can never whip these boys if you don't keep him and them separate. You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
Theophilus Eugene Connor, Bull Connor, he was the police commissioner in Birmingham. And he was large and he was in charge.
Uniformed Forces of Birmingham, led by Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor, who says, "We were trying to be nice to them, but they won't let us be."
The decision to do protests in downtown Birmingham is a very calculated decision to see what Bull Connor is capable of doing that will attract the attention of northern white journalists.
Birmingham is a symbol of hardcore resistance to integration. I have a feeling that if we can get a breakthrough in Birmingham and really break down the walls of segregation, it will demonstrate to the whole South that it can no longer resist integration.
King said, "We've got to go for broke. We have to do something dramatic." And the first thing his advisors told him is, don't tell your father. Don't tell any of your immediate advisors. They don't want you to go to Birmingham. They think it's too dangerous and you don't have a chance to win.
Grown adult protesters get attacked, the media covers it, but after a while that tactic doesn't draw the media anymore. So then King thinks, what can I do now? That's when he decides to have the Children's March. That was very, very controversial, to put children in a situation where you knew that there was going to be violence visited upon them.
We had never done that before. We'd never had children before, and we didn't know what could happen.
These are some of the 1,100 children of Birmingham who demonstrated in the streets and went to jail, and then were either suspended or expelled from school.
These were 11th and 12th graders who were mostly 16 to 19. They were very mindful of the fact that in another year, they could be sent to Vietnam to die for freedom, abroad for somebody else.
The students cut classes and took to the street by the hundreds, following Dr. King's tactic of going to jail deliberately to dramatize the Negro protest against segregation. Unlike Albany, the supply of recruits for the so-called nonviolent army was unlimited.
During the weeks-long Birmingham campaign, King himself was arrested. From his cell, he composed one of the movement's seminal documents, his letter from a Birmingham jail. He wrote, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. For years now, I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. We must come to see that justice too long delayed is justice denied." More than 1,000 school children, first high school students, then much younger ones, left school and headed downtown, where Bull Connor's troops waited with fire hoses and dogs.
Dr. King realized that if you have embers and you have gasoline, all you need to do is get a spark and things will burn.
We had instructed people, you don't run from dogs. You back away from them. Continue to look at them.
I was 16 and I was stupefied by those images. And I see these 6-year-old kids marching into dogs and fire hoses singing freedom songs. And when they see the dogs and the fire hoses, they don't run.
They would pin us to the light pole to keep us from going any further down the street. And you had to hold on to keep from being rolled down the street.
You'd have to describe it as what hell must look like to see human beings being treated that way. Screaming, especially little kids. I've got tears in my eyes right now. It's hard.
Well, these were children with ribbons in their hair, little dresses on, who were getting beaten up. They weren't dressing up in their finest Sunday clothes to get blood all over them just for kicks. They were dressed that way so that they were the maximum amount of sympathetic.
When violence is that visual, it prompts people to action. It gets people's attention in a way that any amount of intellectual discussion can't even approach.
The constant pressure of these stories, the pictures of the police dogs and the fire hoses and the kids being arrested, those were all powerful firecrackers, if you will, on policy.
in Washington. You start to see the country as a whole saying, this is intolerable. This has got to stop. And that puts the pressure on.
By now, the mainstream press was covering all the horrible things in the movement, and particularly what had happened in Birmingham. And that's an important moment in time because it kind of opens up the door for Lyndon Johnson, gives him the space needed to pick up the torch from President Kennedy and push through the Civil Rights Act of 1964.